Welcome everyone to the Faded Connections Path of Exile community podcast. This is the episode number 50 where we talk about the Harvest Manifesto in the context of the PoE crafting ecosystem. And then if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about our favorite neat picks from 3.13 builds and what we feel should be addressed in one of the future patches in terms of balancing. And for this celebratory 50th episode, we of course can't have any better guests than who we have here right now. It's two very avid Path of Exile players who have countless of hours under their respective belts and are also probably the most relevant guests to the PoE podcast meta, the backbone of the critically acclaimed Bakelast podcast. It is none other than Octavian and Tarkycat. Welcome.
You sure you didn't mean to get like Rise on the show? Or?
Yeah, that was so deep I can feel it in my throat. Have you ever got to enjoy explaining basic game mechanics to Rise for like 5 hours? Has he done this podcast yet?
I've
enjoyed watching you explain game mechanics. Like the super basic ones that you're like, I'm sure he already knows that. Like he's definitely trolling you.
I mean, it's fine because he'll then spend the entire next episode explaining what you said to him the last episode and saying that was his opinion for the whole time.
Sounds good. And the backbone was right. I was thinking I could say the face and the brain of the podcast, but then I was worried that you guys would fight over who's the face and who's the brain part.
I mean, we both know that, Bubs is the face and I'm the brain of the podcast community.
Well, Bubs, yeah.
Yeah. So how's everything going? Do you guys still playing Path of Exile these days, or just full-time D&D? Or we'll
just imagine if you could be full-time D&D.
Sure, you can do that.
Last couple days I've been doing a little bit of variety streaming, like literally the last 2 days. But before that I finished up getting 3640, and I don't know, I was gonna start going for 4040, and then I did Osiris on my boss killer and just barely stepped back into the meteor, and now I don't really want to play anymore because the character I invested like 100x in is dead. It did a lot before it died. It got me 3640 and brought down every boss and all that. But yeah, it was a disappointing way to go.
Yeah, I kind of tricked them into letting me on this podcast. I've played all of maybe 10 hours of Path of Exile in the last month. I played a lot of PoE in the first 3 weeks, and then I moved to a new place, did a bunch of job interviews, and then just hadn't touched PoE at all. But I figured I should probably play some before coming on podcast. So yeah, I did an SF restart. I'm now doing an Ice Trapper, which is fun because I freeze things.
That sounds cool. I always wanted to play Ice Trap. You don't believe me, Beller?
No, just so off-brand for Taki to pick a Trapper for his restart.
I mean, it's one of those people like, he only ever plays Corsica, and then I'll play traps. He only ever plays traps. Like, that's 2 builds.
Those are the only 2.
That's a lot. No, because there's lightning trap, fire trap, explosive trap, flamethrower trap. I play toxic rain. Then that's 6 builds. 6 builds.
That's a plural. Right
we haven't even gotten into Ignite. Like we're maybe double digits. Fireball Ignite.
Yep.
Flame Wall. Don't play Flame Wall.
Wall's OP, by the way.
Yeah, Flame Wall's really good. Are there 2 more Ignite skills? Armageddon Brand.
Yep.
Discharge, right?
Haven't played that. There you go. Discharge. 10 builds. There you go.
Dude, Armageddon Brand is so good. I just recently played that because I decided to go DD Necro in the Gauntlet because it's one of the 2 strongest builds that people considered going for the Gauntlet. And since I had played Bleed EQ Gladiator the last couple runs, I decided I'll go with DD Necro. And I've never played Armageddon Brand Cremation as a combo for leveling before. And it's so good. I knew Cremation is great for single target, but the Armor Brand is so much fun, even on a 3-link. It's just pop it here, pop it there, everything dies behind you.
Yeah, one of the Pock is one of the players that I like to watch whenever gauntlets are on because he usually has a pretty spicy strategy. I think this time he ended up going for champion detonate dead. And one of the leveling tips that I picked up from watching his stream, not on the champion variant, but when leveling the armor brand cremation style for a Templar or a witch or something, he'll get double flat cold wands, throw Ice Bite and Ellie Prolif into the links on the armor brand, and it works as another sort of defensive layer. It actually does scale well enough off the flat to freeze everything, even on just a 3 or 4 link.
That's cool.
That's neat.
Yep. I like that.
I usually do that on Stormblast Mine Opus Storms, that instead of going for the lightning damage wand craft, I'll go for the flat cold. So I can have Prolif on the Orpus Storms and just put it down and everything's frozen. But I didn't think about that on the armor brand. I didn't think it was going to be enough. Do you think it would be enough in Gauntlet with a 40% more monster life?
No, I've done it in Gauntlet. That's
oh yeah, you were talking about Pack and Gauntlet.
This Gauntlet I didn't play because I've had some awful performance and connection problems, and I don't know, I didn't want to compete through that. But the one before it I did, and that's how I leveled.
Oh yeah, I've been following your Twitter posts. You had a lot of disheartening deaths this league.
Yes,
probably the worst league I've ever heard of for a single player.
I have died to a game crash or a disconnect this league at level 94, 95, 97, and 99.
Oh.
If it makes you feel any better, Octavian, I've had 7 disconnect deaths this league, but I play softcore, so it's fine.
I did not count mine, but it's been mildly frustrating. Not too bad. But I just get to keep playing the character, so it's fine.
Yeah,
I really miss hardcore, but stuff like that has keeps putting me off. I played I think it was last year I played hardcore for a few leagues in a row. But yeah, just one of those can be enough to trigger you to make you go back to softcore. It is a shame.
Yeah. I don't think I'll go back to hardcore pretty much ever.
If there was an offline client, since I predominantly play SSF, I'd play hardcore. But with online, I wouldn't.
That'd be fair.
Out of curiosity, what keeps you from hardcore?
Honestly, almost everything I make, I end up having to do guides on. And if I die in hardcore before the character's finished, I have to remake the same thing to finish it. Because I'm insistent on knowing a build like top to bottom, inside and out, every option that I could give people, everything. To really feel like I can be like, I now know this enough to say this is the guide. And that this is the best one you should do. Otherwise, I don't bother making one. But if I don't do it in softcore, and I make one screw up at some point 2 weeks in, I got to rebuild the whole character, or don't make any guides on it at all.
Yeah, that's understandable.
And I just don't. It's just not worth. It's just not worth the time. I just want to be in softcore where I can test everything.
That was actually my original motivation for swapping to softcore in Delve, I think it was. There's nothing more frustrating, especially back then, because progression was slower, where you're like, oh, I'm really excited to make a video on this, then you die, and it's like,
and you're like, I wasn't done. I don't know enough yet quite to do the video. Damn it.
I run into that a lot personally, and I guess that's one of the things that frustrates my viewers, because I just go again on the same build. I think I played my league starter this league like 4 times because of all those crashes and stuff, and it was like 2.5 or 3 weeks into the league before I played a new build. So yeah, I can understand that frustration. Yeah. Sure.
You'd probably also frustrate them if you weren't delivering a guide, though.
Yeah. Depends on the build.
I think Octavian viewers are just happy whenever they get like a YouTube video because it's such a rare occurrence. Although you've been pretty good at that recently.
Yeah, I mean, not super regular, but I've been putting one out every like week or 2.
Which is good. Like you would be like 5 leagues, maybe 1 video, and everybody like, oh, Pog, he's doing it. And then it's like, oh, never mind, he's not doing it anymore.
But you do write guides for PoE Vault, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's something you did. And those guides are well written. Probably take more than the average YouTube video to make.
Yes, I do also get paid more than YouTube ad revenue money for that.
That makes sense.
To be completely upfront. So it is easier to find the motivation when the reward is more than the like 6 cents that you get from YouTube ad revenue.
The reward is more tangible. There's indirect reward through getting new people into your stream via YouTube. But yeah.
Oh, actually, I just realized like you're not getting screwed by YouTube because everyone outside of America is now getting like double taxed on YouTube revenue, but you don't have that because you're in America.
Yay! Double tax.
I'll take double tax on my YouTube revenue if it means I get to live somewhere else.
That's a good shout.
I would go for that. Yeah.
You're right. You're right.
I mean, and also that is the benefit of only making like £3 on YouTube is like with the double tax, you can still just about afford a chocolate bar. Just about.
I feel like I barely YouTube and it makes as much or more than Twitch does.
Rates are really different depending on your location, depending on how suitable your content is for advertisements. Yeah, how many people want to advertise to the kind of audience that your videos often bring in. So it's actually extremely variable from person to person. But that's not Harvest. Sorry, I got us off track.
Well, I made a pretty decent amount of money off the video that gave me all of the fucking hate in the world.
That's the best
can we
segue
talk
ever.
about that before we go
Right.
into Harvest? My biggest issue with any like controversy, and we're part of the problem because we're talking about it now, is how people are incentivized to like, I'm going to put my flag down and make a bunch of videos and then make the apology video to my previous video, and it's so exhausting. And what's been particularly frustrating with the Harvest thing is I've had a few people like in DMs talk to me about it. And there'll be other content creators and they'll be like, oh, what do you think? And I'm like, to be honest, I don't really care that much either way. And they're like, oh, I don't either. But meanwhile, you go on their YouTube channel and they've made like 20 videos. Like, this is the biggest, the PoE is dying. And it's like, bro, like, do you have to do that? It's like, I don't know. I can't stand that stuff. It's just so disingenuous.
I mean, it's one thing to legitimately hold those kind of opinions. I don't necessarily agree with them, but I don't think the point that we want to get across is that you can't feel strongly on this topic. It's just that feeling strongly on it for views and money is a little shitty.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I always think that about anything, though.
Yeah, that's fair.
Which is probably why I'm still broke, but
yeah,
I'm much happier about it. So.
Yeah. Broke and happy.
What was the video that got you a ton of hate, though?
Oh, I've had 6 people tell me to unalive myself because of the Harvest video I put out.
Did you see my Harvest video, Bala?
I saw it, but after the reaction I got, I didn't watch anyone else's Harvest videos. I haven't watched a single one.
You might have enjoyed mine. So because I was so exhausted with the whole thing, the way I decided I would talk about Harvest is I loaded up everyone else's Harvest video and played it at 40% volume and spoke over it. And you might be surprised, but the YouTube didn't appreciate that. A lot of people didn't get the joke. A lot of people like Taki. I don't know if you know this, but your audio is slightly scuffed when there's like a million voices in the background, as if I didn't know. And it's like
the whole joke was that you were like just adding noise to a massive crowd.
It's the fact that it's
bullshit.
just noise. It is just constant noise. And I even opened the video saying you don't actually care what my view is on Harvest because everyone's already decided what they think about it, and they just want people to either agree with them so they can be like, I'm correct because X person agrees, or be like, oh, you're an idiot because you disagree with me. And the other thing which was funny about that is I was awake when the Harvest Manifesto went live. And I was like, oh, I'll deal with that tomorrow. I can't really be bothered to make a video about it right now. And then I woke up and I thought I'll skim Reddit. And there were like 3 different Reddit threads talking about my point of view on the Harvest Manifesto. Like just like they weren't the whole thread, but they were like in the comment chains. And it's like, oh, that's cool. I don't need to make a video now because I can just read my opinion on this thing I haven't spoken about. So that's neat, you know.
So you know what you think about it before you make a video about it. That's
great.
really handy. Yeah, no, it's really...
You need to like just on your actual Reddit account that has your name, just like ask for like a link to where you spoke about it.
No, I don't know. It's the whole thing. But,
really seems to be a thing these days to think in strong absolutes when you're disagreeing with people or agreeing with people. It's like what you just said. Either you're cool because you agree with me, or I disagree, and then you're an idiot. There's no nuances anymore.
What is also quite funny about it is when you get people who normally don't like your content, and if you make a video and they agree with you, like, Taki, normally I think you're an absolute dickhead, but for whatever reason, I seem to like you now. And it's like, no, it's because I agreed with you in this one video, dude. Like, that's why you liked this.
Yeah. This validated your opinion, so now you're happy about it.
Yeah. Right, so should we validate some people in chat?
I'm not going to be validating anyone. Everybody hates me.
I think we all kind of agree though. Like it's when I can 100% understand the people who. Okay, so just to preface this, I only play SF in private leagues. They could remove harvest, they could remove fossils, they could remove essences, and I can still play the game. I'm fortunate that I've played the game enough that I'm not dependent on it. And I know that a lot of people who don't have much crafting experience before harvest or had craft experience, but they just never engaged with it. It was great for opening up the game for a lot of people. But they could remove harvest and it wouldn't affect me either way. That being said, generally, I think basically everyone agrees from the content creator point of view that it is the right thing for the game. Even if they don't personally agree with the changes, they can understand why they did the changes.
I might surprise people by saying I actually personally don't want the changes to happen, because the amount of power I personally got out of Harvest was disgusting, and I could make some very disgusting things. But I want it taken out overall because I absolutely don't think that power should have existed. And there's this huge thing. The reason I want it taken out is because it existing the way it does right this second has some really, really, really bad long-term effects on casual and time-limited players. They're going to get hard screwed if it stayed this way. Whereas I'm not. I'm only going to be stronger and stronger the more time you give me with Harvest the way it is right now. My problem with that is, upon having that opinion and wanting it taken out because I understand what's going to happen long-term if that stays in, it is those casual and time-limited players that now hate me and are like, look at this GGG shill person, and I'm like, elitist top 1% out of touch mother. And I'm like, all of this hate is because I'm trying to make, I'm having opinions based on what I think is best for the majority of the players, the casual people. Like, it's not actually good for me personally that it goes away.
Just to like dig into what you mean there a little more. Not that I just basically playing the devil's advocate. What do you mean by the longer term repercussions?
So because it's the single largest power creep that's ever happened is Harvest. And a result of that means that the entire game got very, very significantly easier really early. So all balance is done at this point around softcore trade. Like, we know that. So small private leagues, solo self-found is just like a hard mode that doesn't matter, doesn't get balanced around for the sake of balancing things. So the trade, the way it works now is everyone at a baseline, even with limited playtime and everything, got about 4 or 5 times as strong. Players like me that were abusing it got about 35 to 45 times as strong, just like that. And that means we then, if that stays that way, have to balance the game around this new amount of power, which at some point in the near future would end up being something along the lines of 10,000% increased health on white mobs and 8,000 more on magic mobs, and then quadruple the health on uniques and stuff like that. And just to bring it up to that level. But then puts this sort of barrier on being able to do it, where if you don't involve yourself in harvestcraft, you won't be strong enough to get anything done. And that is incredibly bad for new players and more casual players. And that's the long-term effect. It has to be. There's no way around that if you leave it this powerful.
You think that's
It also... Oh, go on. I'll take it.
No, you go ahead. Turkey.
It's also that whole thing of, for the longest time, I remember talking about this like when I first started making content back around like Prophecy Breach for PoE on YouTube and stuff. And I was saying that I really wish that the direction PoE would go more in is limiting the top end, bringing the top end down, bringing the bottom up. But what tends to always happen is a case of, we'll just give new tools so the top end gets higher, but you have to have a certain amount of game knowledge to be able to engage with those systems. And the gulf with someone who understands how Harvest works and how to utilize it, and someone who's just like maybe rolling a free exalt on an item is crazy. And especially when you start having limited playtime, and also the fact that to really get the most out of Harvest, you need to have that big access of, I'm going to use the Discord, or I'm going to have people feeding me these crafts. And yeah, that whole thing. And then with Maven Orbs, it gets really silly. And it's like,
GGG have actually been explicit on that topic before. I remember towards the beginning of Synthesis League, we had, there was, I think it was on one of the other podcasts that Chris has been on in the past, and like not Bay Class, one of the other ones. And he was talking about how the changes with Synthesis were meant to be a kind of power creep that was like a cherry on top, rather than taking everything in the game and ratcheting it up by 10% in terms of crafting. They wanted to take current crafting and just put something else on top of that, as in, you know, push the ceiling. So that's actually like been the explicit goal of GGG's controlled power creep in the past. So I feel they like that direction. You know, you could look at, if you want to go back another few leagues, you could even look at double corruption as being a similar thing, where it's this very top end oriented kind of power creep.
I think the very difference between like any other system that's been added onto crafting, because we've had a lot of them since when we only had like Chaos Orbs and Exalts and whatever. We've had a lot of additions. Harvest is the only one that completely invalidates every other method.
Yeah, Harvest is kind of the opposite of that.
There isn't a reason to fossil craft. There just isn't a reason to ever use an essence on anything. There just isn't.
Well, I would actually disagree with that. I would say Harvest does invalidate everything, but also Harvest works with everything. So that's where you can get the really like OP and also quite quirky. And I think that's the one good thing about Harvest. So like, for example, if there's like a really cool essence mod you want, and there's a really cool fossil thing, you can't use those together. So you either fossil, essence, use like alterations, whatever. But with Harvest, you can be like, oh, I'm going to guarantee this really good essence mod, and then use Harvest to like force the one influence affix or whatever. And that is the one thing that I do like about Harvest. But the problem that you have with Harvest, and it's a big reason why I stopped playing this league so early, is every item gets completed through Harvest. And this isn't even about like talking about the triple mirror stuff. Like, I've always been someone who I don't need to make that good gear to be able to clear the content. So I'll be like, okay, what is one really cool like essence thing I want? I'll go for that like dodge roll, and then I can force the 1 or 2 good influence mods I need easily with Harvest. So it's like at the start of the league, I started playing Corsica like week 2, and in like 3 days, I was the highest Corsica for SSF and DPS, which was kind of fun for a little bit. And you laughed, but there's a lot, like there was like 5% of like all of software stuff was playing Corsica. So it was like there were quite a few people going for it. And that was literally just a case of, here is a base which is eye level 86, essence, Harvest, done. And like if your goal is just to make that like good enough gear, and to be fair, good enough gear is still like tier 1 life, 2 really good influence mods, and then some other fluff. Like people kind of look at good enough gear like, oh, why would you ever want that? But like, you can do everything in the game with it. It's like like pre-Harvest, you'd look at that item and be like, dude, that's really sick, nice. But yeah, it's like everything just became a case of, well, if I'm going to be doing Delve doesn't interact with Atlas, so I'm not getting Harvest. So I don't really want to do Delve. Why would I do Heist? Because Heist doesn't give me Harvest. Everything just just Harvest or nothing. And that, I think, would have been incredibly negative if that was a long-term play pattern that persisted for multiple leagues.
Yeah,
I feel
Please go first.
Like we're not losing Harvest. That's something that I feel gets
so
glossed over in a few conversations here and there. Where since the discussion is so polarized and there's people who are shouting such strong opinions one way or the other, it can often feel like Harvest is just gone next league, but that's not going to be the case at all. And I worry that we're still going to have this issue. It's just going to be moved. So like some of the crafting, maybe not every crafting project, but a lot of crafting projects are still going to involve harvesting a base item to a certain point, and then maybe adding influence with an exalt orb, and then maybe auging influence and trying to get what you need that way. Or, adding influence with an exalt orb. So you get a base item to 3 prefixes that you need, and there's like a decent, suffix that you're looking for that's influenced. You slam, you don't manage to hit it. All right, you keep prefix, reroll suffix until you hit it. That sort of thing. Like, Harvest is still going to be one of the best means for continuing to work with an item that is in a partially completed state. Actually, it's pretty much the only means of doing that isn't going to chew through your exalts, meta crafting and all that. So it's still going to be how you finish the majority of items.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm still not really looking forward to that, but at the very least, it does mean that a lot of other crafting mechanisms are going to be a lot more relevant to begin with. So that's neat.
There's also a bunch of ways now, the more I look into it, where you'll be using a bunch of different things, like fossils into an item to get something, and then crafting meta mods on it, and then using Harvest, and then slamming it with like an influenced exalt to get the kind of thing you want. Like, that's actually going to exist, whereas before, just harvest a lot if I can.
There's also, like, one of the biggest things I have, like, even if you really like Harvest from a crafting point of view, and I can understand why some people really like it, I just don't think the gameplay is fun. I think that's been like the biggest stickler for me is, and a few people have mentioned this like in the chat now and on previous episodes and stuff. That was what I think one of the things which should annoy me the most is that the best way for me to continue progressing my character was to spam maps to force proc Harvest, but then procking Harvest then completely kills my flow of mapping because I'm now in this random area for the next 5 to 10 minutes. And then it's like so disjointing. And that is the good thing about like stockpiling essences or fossils or alterations or whatever, is you can be like, I'm going to stockpile 1,000 of these, and then I'll just spend a day when I want to doing that when I have downtime.
Can I take a moment here? Because you talked about how Harvest interrupts your flow of mapping, and people were talking about that for all this link. I think Ziggy brought it up at one point, where they were saying that like you have to stop and you have to do like these 70 different crafts if you want to make use of everything out of the garden. And GGG are trying to address that in the changes, and I really dislike the way they're trying to address that. So what they're doing is they're making it so you get this bundle of seeds. Say you have 10 life seeds, 5 chaos seeds, and a bunch of other crap. You see 5 chaos seeds, and you're not going to get 5 chaos crafts. You're going to get somewhere from like 0 to 5 chaos crafts. We don't know the odds yet. And that, I feel like, is going to lead to a situation where someone desperately needs a chaos aug to get the next step of their item done so they can keep on working on it. And they come across a garden that has 3 chaos seeds, and they're like, oh, hell yeah, I got a chance at a chaos aug. And then nothing even remotely chaos related shows up. That's going to feel terrible. It does accomplish the goal of cutting down the total number of crafts in your harvest so you're not locked in there for as long, but there's so many better ways to accomplish it. What if you had it so when you find a harvest, 3 little menus pop up with 3 different buckets of seeds, and you pick one of them, and those are the ones that you get, and you get all of those seeds. And now it's generating a large number of seeds, so you still have a large number of potential options, but you're choosing what you want, and you're not getting fucked out of what you might have actually been aiming for. So you don't get a bloated garden with millions of crafts you don't want, but you also don't get the situation where you find a seed that you need and it doesn't give you anything.
Alternatively, you could just not have a goddamn limit on the bench of 10, and then you could keep whatever you wanted and then craft when you want, which is exactly what we do with fossils, essences, alterations, chaos, everything else.
The limit should not be global. The limit should be there should be categories. I don't think that all the crafts should compete with each other for slots on the crafting station, because there's so many different crafts.
Like, I want to be able to keep reroll fizz until I've got 100 reroll fizzes, and then try and work on a weapon or something.
My biggest issue with Harvest, which I don't hear many people talk about, is I feel like Harvest fails at introducing new players to crafting, because the original intent of Harvest was, and Chris spoke about this when he was being interviewed by Ziggy in like the lead up to the league. So it's like, oh, it's really cool. So what we'll do is we'll front load all the really powerful crafts. So like at level 20, you're quite likely to get like a bunch of Exalt crafts, and we'll taper them off and make them rarer the higher into content you get to keep it balanced. And they had this whole thing of like, they had the item level ranges and all this other stuff. So I was like, okay, cool. We want players to use Exalts, want people to use Annuls. You can make some really fun leveling gear. Great. So like, okay, so that was the intention of this entire system. And then we made it map only. And now it's like, wait, so it completely kills the point of it. It doesn't introduce people into it. Harvest really should have been added in like vault side areas, and means like you encounter it while leveling. I don't think it should have gone core, but like if it was going to go core, it should be something that you encounter early, because it's an amazing tool to introduce people into systems. But then just gating it into maps, and then also the fact that to really get the most out of it, you then need to have all this atlas set up. You need to understand how powerful Harvest is to then know to invest. Like, you need to have all of this knowledge to get the garden working correctly for you, to do the crafting. And people who say, oh, this is so good for casuals. It's like, most people who say that it's good for casuals, you're not a casual. Because it's like, I've played this game for like, oh, I'm a casual. I've played this game for 7 years and I've got all of this knowledge. Like, no, that's not a casual. You're just someone with limited playtime. My opinion of a casual is someone who's casual,
like, right?
Yeah, I think I'm very casual from a people, but like, no, when I say like a casual, really it's like someone who's maybe started playing the league before, you know, and they don't really go on YouTube, they don't really go on Reddit. Like, those are the kinds of players who you should really be trying to introduce into the new systems. And also, as you say, Bala, that's when you get the massive gulfs of these people who've just kind of come into the game, versus someone like Bala who's like abusing everything they can in Trade League, you know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but can I just really quickly say, that's a good point, but what you said with I want to branch off of what you said with it shouldn't have gone core to begin with, because I totally agree it did a very good job when it was a league to get people into those systems, to introduce people to the mod categories and the different mod pools that you can have on different item bases. And I would have been completely fine with it just going away and never coming back, because it didn't feel as bad in Heist when it wasn't there. But then, I don't know why, I think like to some degree GGG just really wanted to do a big crowd-pleasing expansion and get a huge player spike again, and for some reason they committed to bringing it back by saying early on, oh, it's going to make a return in 3.13, and then despite the fact that, I mean, that's evident from the manifesto, they didn't just learn that in this league, that there was problems with Harvest that needed to be resolved, but they probably knew that going in. And I just think it shouldn't have gone core unaltered, basically unaltered without the garden mechanic. It gave this kind of signal to the player base where the player base thinks GGG says, well, it looks a little bit strong right now, but it's going to be okay. We promise it's going to be okay. We can bring it back like that. And that then they just directly go back on it and take it away from players. I can see why people would be a little bit upset if that's the biggest power they ever had in Path of Exile.
Yeah, and one of the examples that Chris has pointed to into the past, and Tarky's brought it up a number of times and such, is that GGG, it used to be a much bigger discussion. It's kind of fallen to the back of the community now, but GGG have always wanted to try and slow down the game a little bit. And in the past, they've said that they don't like the power of mobility skills, you know, where like things like Flame Dash and Shield Charge and all that were. But they have this cautionary tale of, was it a DC ARPG or a Marvel?
Marvel Heroes.
Marvel, yeah. Where they, in 1 or 2 patches, basically just gutted every single mobility ability all at once, and the player base evaporated. Because you can't do that. You can't give people this really powerful toy, this delicious ice cream and then just yoink it all away from them all at once. If Harvest was thrown into the game in unadulterated state to, appease players after Heist, which was a bit of a fiasco of a league, that was basically, at that point, you have to make the decision, either Harvest just stays in the game in that state, or you're just delaying the next fiasco. Because, when you then go to edit it and nerf it down to the place where you wanted it nerfed down, people are going to get more angry. This is all pretty easy to see with hindsight, obviously. But
I mean, even without hindsight, I don't know. I was very much part of the anti-Harvest crowd early on. And I remember I heard about it going core before it was announced, and I'm like, no, this is a terrible mistake. And they're like, no, it's fine. It's like, ugh. But yeah, I don't know. I think that this could just be my perception, but this isn't any inside information or anything. But I do feel like there's a kind of a disconnect between what GGG says they want from the game, what they say they want PoE2 to be, and then what they put out. Because for the longest time, even before we knew anything about PoE2, before we had 10 acts or anything, for the longest time, whenever Chris was asked about stuff, people were like, yeah, I do kind of miss that old school 10 minutes to kill a crab. And that's kind of what PoE was for a lot of people. And a lot of people started playing the game because of that. A lot of people stopped playing the game because of that as well. And a lot of people only started playing the game once it started getting a lot faster. But there is a lot of old school players who kind of miss that slower approach. And the devs seem to miss that slow approach. So then when we had XLCon and we played the demo was a lot harder, it was a lot slower, and they purposely overtuned it so that it would be really punishing. And the devs was like, yeah, this is really what we kind of want, but it obviously won't be that punishing when it actually goes live. It's just fun to tune it up this way. But we do want to slow the game down a bit and bring it back to its roots. It's like, okay. So people keep saying, oh, between now and PoE2, they're going to slowly do all these little changes. And the game does keep getting increasingly harder because we get stuff like Delirium. It adds this whole extra level of difficulty. But then you get Harvest, and it's like, well, you're not. It doesn't feel like you're working towards that goal. It kind of feels like we're like, oh, new exciting spectacle creep, because spectacle creep is exciting and it gets new players in. But it just seems to be pushing us further and further away from this goal, which I don't know if that even is the goal, or I don't know. It seems to.
No, I mean, I just remember the extreme buffs to monster health that they did in 3.9 Metamorph that have completely been out power crept. That makes any sense? It's just, yeah. And the worst thing about that is also the imbalance where some things just were forgotten to be changed, like some smaller bosses in between, and the mini bosses in the core map, for example, are a pushover. They're white monsters. And it's been like that for more than a year. That can't be the design goal.
But the one thing that confuses me the most is how did this mistake of Harvest in its current form actually happen? Because here's the thing. Before Harvest League actually came out,
okay.
Chris was straight up saying,
this will never go
This is going to break the game.
Yeah.
We know this is going to break the game, and we're doing it anyway just to see what you guys do with broken, overpowered shit, essentially. And so they already knew before Harvest even started. Before we even got it the very first time, they knew it was absolutely busted OP. What happened in the fucking meetings?
Yeah, during Heist League.
Between knowing it was broken and then seeing all the bullshit we did, somebody made the decision to leave it the same before bringing it back core. What? How?
The perception, I think, this is pure speculation, is that Heist was very poorly received. Whether you like Heist or not, however you feel on the mechanic itself, it's a fact. It was very poorly received. And I think there was something of a knee-jerk reaction to give people what they want after Heist. And the perception as well was that Harvest is what people want. Because there's a lot of people loudly asking for Harvest at the end of Harvest to go core. So I think it was put into the core game as a direct result of that. And to some degree, at least. I mean, maybe that wasn't 100% of the reasoning, but yeah, I think that was a pretty influencing factor. It's but in response to what you said about, Chris mentioning that they knew it was broken going in, I just couldn't shake the image from my mind of somebody like cooking up a meal and like pranking whoever they're feeding it to by putting tons of spicy stuff in and going like, they're gonna hate this, I'm gonna break it on purpose, and the person eats it and just loves it. And now what do? You just put like a bucket of hot peppers into everything you make? What the fuck do you do at that point? You don't expect them to actually want it. It was supposed to be broken.
Yeah, I don't know. It's also sorry. It's the fact that it is worth considering and talk about, the delays and everything that's happened with COVID, and then they knew that Ritual was going to be like a smaller scope league as well because they're putting all this work into Echoes. So I think it's a lot easier. I think it's quite easy from our point of view, not having access to any of the metrics, having our points of view validated, being like, well, it was obvious they should have done blank, and why did they do this? But meanwhile, from their point of view, it's like, well, we have the numbers, and it's a case of if Harvest had gone core the way it did, but we then didn't have Echoes and we didn't have the Discord, would it have been that bad? Because it wasn't just a case of like, oh, we're going to add the Harvest in, but we're going to add the Harvest in, but then give you all of these really insane ways to target Harvest. And they probably didn't intend for that, plus the Zana interaction and all this. And like, that's the issue then when you have these really big teams. And when you have such a big team with hundreds of employees and the communication isn't that great, half of them are working on PoE2, half of them working on this, half of them's working on the next league. It's a lot easier for these interactions to slip through. Like, that's how we get the whole like costual aura stacking thing, is you've got the one guy who's like, I'm doing this, that guy's doing that. And you're like, yeah, that's going to be strong, but it's not going to be that strong. And then in comes this side change, which amplifies that. And you're like, oh, this is broken now.
That's actually a really good point, because Harvest isn't that broken just taken by itself. Like, for me as an SSF player, it wouldn't make much of a difference if it went away, because I don't see it all that often. But for softcore trade, it's huge when you have all the endgame stuff unlocked in the center of the Atlas, and you got the specialized zones with the Harvest nodes, and then you got the Discord where you can trade the crafts. It becomes from a nice little crafting mechanic that gives you a sort of deterministic path to finish one or two good items per league. It becomes a straight up item editor that breaks the game.
Yeah, I imagine there's some degree of I imagine there's like this mix of admiration for how quickly the community can put together tools for things for the game, and also a bit of frustration on the part of the devs for that. It's like, maybe back in the day, people would just like trade across the forum and stuff, but now if they put anything in the game, there's a large enough player base and enough skilled dedicated community members in that player base that if they put something in the game, it will be solved and it will be exploited if it can be exploited within like a week. You'll have streamlined Discord servers pop up, you'll have third-party tools, you'll have things that just completely solve every little aspect of every crafting system in the game pop up within a week or two.
Betrayal's actually a pretty good example of that. I think you were one of the first people I remember to talk about it when Betrayal first came out, Octavian. But there was the whole thing of like the original intent of that was make everyone trusted, and then this is the whole thing. And I remember people going like, well, what if we didn't make them trust? What if we made them all hate each other? Wouldn't that be way stronger? Because then we can do this, that, and the other. And then this super OP dominant strat came out, which a lot of people still don't know or can't be bothered setting it up because it's such a pain to set it up. But once you have that established, it just completely breaks the whole system in terms of like reward.
You make a few X every map, or like every few maps you make like 3 or 4X just from having it set up. Still takes me like a week and a half to set up though, with like 14-15 hour days of streamer time. It's still like a week and a half to set up, and then it's just free money forever.
But if you kill Katarina, you might get a few scarabs.
There's also the fact that I don't think enough people talk about it, that PoE really is like 8 different games, Not just in the fact of there's all this different side content you could do. You could be someone who's like, oh, I'm just going to delve, or I'm going to just do this, or I'm going to just do that. But there's such a big difference between someone who plays softcore trade and fully utilizes softcore trade, like the absolute like min max all of your APIs. Someone who just like, oh, I maybe buy unique if I need it. People who play SSF, and there's the whole hardcore thing. Like and then there's the time scale of like how much do you actually play. Like there's such a massive gulf in what can be achieved. And I think that, and I know content creators got this, but I think also like Reddit especially is guilty of this. Like the difference between the average Reddit user and what they do in PoE to the actual average Path of Exile player who doesn't engage in this tiny little community, because the PoE Reddit isn't actually that big. It's like the same like 500 power posters. It's like if you ever upload a thing, it's to the same people every single time. The game is a lot bigger than we give it credit, and the like gulf between players is massive.
Damn it. I had something to say and I've lost it now.
Oh, sorry, dude.
Okay, let me interject. Do you think the manifesto did a good job of conveying the intent behind the changes, and did it do a good job at calming the waves before they even are stirred up? Or think that maybe that the way that the manifesto was written and how receptive for memes nowadays the community has become?
Catmas, do you think that isn't a leading question? Like, come on, dude. Like, what? Hi, I'm gonna ask you this blatantly. Like, that's like, hi, Mr. President, how do you feel about drone strikes killing civilians? It's like, let me answer this one. I think they actually did a decent job of conveying their intent. I don't think it was that good of a manifesto, but it was clear that like we're changing this because we think it's too strong, and that was obvious, right? I think they did a good job portraying that, but no, I think it could have been worded better.
Confused.
Although there is the whole thing, and I've spoken about this before. A lot of what frustrates me with how just people react to stuff on the internet is there's a lot of just taking stuff at bad faith. Like specifically with like the exalted line. It's very easy to meme that like close your eyes and exalt moment. But that is actually a moment in Path of Exile. And it could even be a moment with Harvest. It's like, oh, am I gonna get it? Oh, fingers like that is something that PoE is built around. Like even with Harvest crafting, like, am I going to hit it on this? Like fizz and exalt, or do I need to fizz annul it 20 times? Like people are super disingenuous, like, oh, why would you ever do that? So they could have said like regal, like, did I hit the regal? Did I get this thing? Like, did the item? Like, so much of PoE is trying to get that thing right. So it's clear to tell their intent behind that sentence. But instead of being like, I can see what they're coming from, they'll be like, no, I haven't exalted an item in 10 years. What an idiot! Do they even play their game? And there's just a lot of bad faith arguments. So I think it was something that someone should have read that and been like, they're going to meme the hell out of this. We should change the wording. But at the same time, it's very clear to read that and understand the intent of that sentence.
I agree with that. I just think it felt a little bit disconnected, particularly on the Exalt Slam part, because I think the big problem with Harvest going away or being nerfed for people is that the average player that complains, the average casual, meme casual, is not necessarily gonna miss the power that Harvest brought that much if they only knew about the whole crafting. The thing what's good about Harvest for the newer player is that it lays out a path for you to a good item, because it kind of breaks down everything into little steps when you have like an abstract goal of a good item. Whereas if you try to accomplish that with meta crafting through the bench and through fossils and stuff, you'd have to do more abstract thinking and breaking down that goal into smaller bite-sized packages that you can accomplish. And then giving people who are sad about that going away the alternative of, oh, you can close your eyes and slam exalts, instead of laying out this crafting ecosystem of the different things that you can do in Path of Exile, because we have good systems. I just feel like that could have calmed a lot of waves. I didn't mean to be I didn't mean to bait you into saying that manifesto was shit, but that's kind of what I wanted to say.
I agree with what you said just there. However, and this might be like the dumbest take in the world, I think the main reason people are upset about Harvest actually has nothing to do with crafting. So what you said, the thing which is good about Harvest is very good for setting small goals. And to play Path of Exile for a long time, you need to be setting small goals. And it's very easy to be like, oh, I've killed the boss now, I guess I'll just quit. Path of Exile can be quite difficult to have clear, steady progression because a lot of people consider it a case of, okay, I play, I die, I've lost the XP I spent the whole day going for, I haven't gained any progression there. Oh, it's just a random exalt, everything's just pure RNG. Whereas Harvest did give a very clear progression path. If Harvest was pulled out, but then a very clear, very linear, bite-sized progression path was put in, it would solve that problem because you would then have a reason to play every single day very easily because it can be quite difficult to set your goals. Like for some people, it'll be a case of, I'll go for my 36 challenges. A lot of people don't care about challenges or like, oh, I'll go for level 100 or I'll go for this, I'll go for that. But just having a reason to log in every day. Like I didn't really like Paragon from a Diablo point of view, but Paragon was very good for a fact of you play for a day, you log off, and your character is stronger than when you started.
I think GGG is aware of that to some degree. It's not within the crafting systems or character progression, but they have been trying to add meaningful bite-sized bits of progression or smaller goals to the Atlas, you know, like 10-way Maven fights or progression towards a Conqueror, that sort of thing. And that sort of splitting up this vast amorphous end game that you previously had, which was just you're in maps, run maps now, into, you know, you're in maps, here, do these 10 maps, and then do those 10 maps, and then do these 10 maps, and then do those 4 maps, and then you get to kill this guy. And they seem to be aware that splitting it up into those more manageable bits of content makes it easier for people to approach it. But yeah, I guess that's a little bit beside the point because it's not directly related to your gear or your character levels.
Yeah. I just had an idea. It would be cool to have like an in-game system that tells you what the next step for your item creation progress is, similar to how in the Chinese client you can punch in the tree that you want to have for your endgame build, and it tells you on every level what your next point is. So you can kind of make in-game, you can make a plan for what you want to accomplish, and then it gives you single steps, but obviously that's way too much work.
Yeah, it would be really difficult as well, because a system like that, if you want it to actually function, it would have to be able to intelligently reason about which crafting methods are the best to accomplish your goal, as well as understand what your goal is. And at that point, I don't know, if you can make that, then I think you're going to make a lot more money and have a lot broader applications than just putting it in a video game.
Yeah.
All right.
Also, sorry, go on, Bal, if you want to say something.
I have a kind of related question that I can't figure out how to answer on my own. We keep talking about, and for like years, we collectively talk about the casual player's experience, which just isn't defined at all. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Like, who do we even count when you're saying like the average player? Because like half of people, way more than half of people never even make it to maps. But
I mean, the average player, if we were to look at Steam, didn't even like beat Hitlock. You know, it's such a
for a balanced relation, that's an irrelevant. Your average player is irrelevant. So recently, I've been saying that when I talk about an average player, I mean that you eventually make it to tier 14 and 15 and 16 maps. I don't care how long, but you get there at some point during the league.
Mm-hmm.
With the current system the way it is, I'm calling that the average player that matters for balance reasons and stuff. Like these are the people that are actually playing the game enough and getting far enough through it. Anyone below that who's just in yellow and white maps, I'm calling them new players. Because essentially, you're a new player. If you literally can't make it to the end game, then you're still new.
I think it is an interesting thing to just remind people that the whole like casual, like just all of that stuff doesn't mean anything. but actually defining it is near impossible and just like a waste of an hour. But like, I think it is very important that people just remind themselves when they say like GGG hates X portion of the player base. It's like people say that I'm part of the 1%, which makes me laugh my absolute arse off, because it's like I will play maybe a month of a 3-month league in SSF, and like by a streamer, I'm incredibly casual because I'll be like 6 hours a day for like 3 weeks. But that compared to just a normal person who plays Path of Exile maybe a couple of hours a week, like it's ridiculous, right? So that's why it's important to just keep in mind that like this is such a different game depending on who you are. But yeah, you can't divine anything. Cause like what is it? And there's also the fact of, and you did this with your limited playtime thing, you know, you could play 20 hours of Path of Exile a day badly, or you could have a super efficient build and play 2 hours a day with a very clear goal and get way more done. Mm-hmm. You know, like some people will get to maps in an hour, someone else will get to maps in 15. Like, you know, it's a whole, yeah.
And is there any way to solve that? Because it's such a, like, solve that we can't really define those terms. They don't mean anything.
It's all about the context of the particular discussion. You know, if you're talking about the balancing around content like 100% Delirious T16s, then, you know, you define your terms based on what you're talking about there. You talk about something like how the onboarding to the end game should be and what the experience in like T1 maps should be, then obviously you're going to be thinking about a different type of player. I don't really think you can make hard definitions. So it really just should be something that you need to come to grips with every time you want to actually have a discussion of any sort of that matters at all about any particular part of the game. I don't know. Like I
hate not having defined terms. This is nearby all over again.
You can't.
Nearby?
You can't.
Yeah.
You can't have defined terms in this. I don't know. It's people. It's human beings. You can't have defined terms that lump them into buckets that easily.
I mean, when we have the whole thing with Path of Exile of what's in nearby and my new time favorite for a while, it's like we had recently. Recently it's dead for a while. Yeah. All right, cool. Let's go. Like whatever, dude.
So I think it was Mark that was in the comments of that Reddit thread defending the for a while text on the buff. So apparently the for a while pops up when you like hover over the buff while it's on your buff bar. It's the Elemental Aegis thing that Elementalist just recently got. And the reason why it does that is because the duration has some variance to it or something like that. And if they were to actually have the portions of the game code communicate so that it could show the exact duration, it would use up way, way, way more like processing power than is necessary. And they don't need to tell you how long it is if you're just hovering over it for a half a second in game. So they just have it say for a while. Like,
didn't he also say that the exact duration is displayed elsewhere in the game, like in your
yes?
Your
if you go to your character sheet and look at the actual ability there, it'll tell you the duration.
Yeah. To backtrack a little bit to the manifesto thing, and this is one thing that it's funny. I planned that whole video. I was stoked about Cat Marshall, but I planned this whole video about like parasocial relationships and the relationships that players have with GGG as a studio and how that changes the way people react to stuff. And then Asdon made a video all about parasocial relationships. I'm like, I can't make that now because people just think I was copying it. But one thing which I think is very much worth considering is with this Harvest Manifesto, we have zero context for crafting in 3.14, 3.15 or onwards. We have no context of drop to loot. We know that they're not happy with the current state of crafting. We know they're not happy with the current state of loot dropping. There's almost definitely going to be some changes, but we don't know what those changes are. And one thing that GGG is very good at is being like, we're going to destroy this thing that you really like, but we're actually going to fix it like 2 leagues from now, but we're not going to tell you until that league comes out. The best example of that is you had the entire player base just bored beyond belief with the old axe system. And they knew that it's like 10 axe, but they didn't want to tell people because it was like they decided it was a better marketing move to have that massive trailer moment. But there was a solid year of people being like, GGG doesn't know what the hell they're doing. This is terrible. Why aren't they telling us what their plans are? And I think that, you know, maybe being so secretive maybe isn't the best move, because it's a lot easier to feel like you're being ignored when people don't tell you what they're planning to do, you know. So
yeah. And with future leaks, I mean, we could very well. I personally think that the rework of the loot system needs to happen before PoE 2, like preferably this year. I don't know what the date is for PoE 2, but I heard you say before, Tarky, that, and I picked that up and agreed with it, that it can't be on a different date than Christmas. Like, they have to do it as a Christmas release, PoE 2, like just number wise. And then it's probably very, very tight to bring it out this year for Christmas. So
no, PoE. Why do people know? 2023 is the soonest. The soonest.
Yeah.
People keep saying, "Oh, it's coming out." No, like, no. The absolute best case scenario is, so it's 2021 now. At some point this year, we will get more news on it. Maybe we'll get like a limited beta for like a couple of acts. I highly doubt it. I would say 2022 beta.
Yeah, I don't think
this year we'll get a beta. 2023 you maybe get it going live, because it's one of those things. If they could easily do 2024, PoE, I don't know. The other thing, and this is something which because people keep telling me that Diablo 4 is coming out next month. Like every month is, oh, it's coming out soon. It's like, no, like the game isn't even made. We have no basis for Path of Exile with BlizzCon. If Blizzard comes out and they show you a WoW expansion, you know that's coming out next year, and then that comes out next year. Next BlizzCon, they show you the next update for the expansion. BlizzCon after that, they announce the next expansion. There's a formula to it. We understand what their schedule is. With ExileCon and PoE 2, we have no idea. There's also the whole thing of, you know, they wanted to do massive expansions for the studio. Then COVID happened, which completely screwed that. Then there's been a bunch of new game studios popping up in New Zealand, like stealing members of staff and whatever. So like, then tech and who knows, and there's always that one guy who's got this really good idea, and people are like, that's a sick idea, we should add that to the game. And that's like 5 more months of development, and you know, like what if we did this? And it's like, wait, hang on,
why did you say it? Now we have to do it.
So I don't know.
PoE 2 is still out for a long time. Loot is in a terrible state right now, and they have already been testing the system with which loot gets rerolled several times before it's presented to the player with heist and with ritual. So it's reasonable to assume that we'll get some changes to the loot system soon before PoE 2.
I think you could kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. And some of the Atlas passive nodes are a little underwhelming. And Loot 2.0 is pretty darn neat. So why not make it so that the Rogue Exile node, when you kill a Rogue Exile, the rares that it drops have a 10% chance to drop Identified and Lucky. And, you know, when you go to the Heist node, and uniques have a 10% chance to drop as a replica variant of themselves. That sort of shit. Like, we have this tool now with the Atlas passive points where you can use it as a way of testing the waters to throw in some mechanics you might be experimenting with, because you can throw them in, but only in this part of the Atlas and only if you're doing it this way with this mechanic. So even if it's busted, it's still got some limiters on its bustedness.
I think I just really want the whole loot rework to happen.
Oh yeah, eventually.
Yeah. It's the impact that loot is having on performance is so ridiculously high. The whole game, if they cull 90% of the loot drops out of the game, nobody notices. Even people running basic never sync semi-strict filter with like what I would call everything showing isn't everything showing. It's like 8 to 10% of things showing. If they get rid of the 90% of loot we don't see, use, or want, everybody's performance would like triple or quadruple in quality. That's how much loot is screwing you. That needs to it just needs to happen. It just has to happen.
Yeah, that reason and the constant ongoing battle between players like yourself, Balor, who like to minimize their item filter to like 5 different types of items that they pick up. That battle between that type of player and the GGG developers trying to create rewarding loot explosions that feel good. And it's
I mean,
stacking
don't balance
arms.
around me. I turn off everything that's rare on day one.
Yeah, I mean, there's that whole thing as well that I remember. You kind of forget that loot filters are a thing once when you played them for a certain point. But I remember at Heist clicking on a chest and nothing came out of it, and I'm like, "What is this bugged?" And then I'm like, "No, Taki, you've just filtered everything out of this chest. Like the chest drops loot, but there's just something in your brain that's very wrong with like click on big reward box, nothing comes out of it, and you're like, this seems to be wrong." Yeah, loot rework is definitely needed. For me, the 2 biggest issues I have with Path of Exile is Flask first and foremost, then loot. I've hated Flask for years. I think our first Bay class, actually, I was saying Flask needed a rework. And I worry the Flask rework like that, I don't think is going to happen anytime soon, but desperately, Flasks need changing.
Yeah, they could easily probably increase the amount of flask charges that they can hold and that they need to use for. They could increase that by a factor of 10.
I don't think you should have harassment uptime on flasks. Flasks, like they should be this cool like cooldown. You press it and you feel powerful. Like this whole like.
At this point, flasks are just extra pieces of gear, and every single one of them that's rolled correctly is as good or more important than your current chest piece. That is 5 pieces of gear, and they're just permanent. They're just on permanently. That's how it is.
And it's also like they further breed the problem between someone who's playing on this level and that level, because there's a very big difference between someone who can global a boss with all their flasks up and then someone who's got like a 10-minute long fight and they're having to really manage their charges and everything. I think Flask gameplay isn't good. A lot of my issues with Path of Exile just comes down to gameplay, like ignoring if Harvest is broken or not broken. I don't think the core gameplay is good. And I think the same thing with Flask. People are like, oh, well, we'll just make a Flask macro. But yeah, but Flask macros isn't good gameplay because then you just press a button. Like it's not.
What that does is help your hands, and I think a Flask macro should be immediately just turned on in the game client because that already exists and my hands hurt. Yeah. And we know that they could just flick it on. If I wasn't a streamer, I'd be using a Flask macro at a heartbeat. But if I use it ever, I'll get banned. So I'm not going to use it. But I would because my hands kill me.
Yeah.
Kill me. But that's not a solution. That's just like a band-aid over the top of like just stop. That's just stopping a really shit system from hurting my hand. That's not actually fixing a really shit system.
Also, one thing that's 100% going to happen. Eventually, there's going to be like an official Flask macro or whatever. But if they ever do make that, they need to normalize Flask durations, because there's going to be nothing more frustrating than everyone using Flask macros, but then all of their flasks having different durations. And it's like, wait, hang on, this doesn't line up. Like the system just isn't designed for that. Like if you're going to have that, you then need to normalize flasks so that you can just
I mean, you get so many charges. I don't even. I count to 3 in my head just on default, and just my hand goes over all the flasks.
Yes,
and I never even look at the bar. Just every 3 seconds for the entire gameplay. Every time I'm in any map anywhere, every 3 seconds, just tap all 5 buttons at the top there. And that's the whole thing.
And I remember a time when I started playing the game when it was actually a lot slower than it was now, and you probably kill 1/10 of the monsters per second that you kill now, and Flask gameplay actually felt somewhat interesting, and you were using the Flasks at pivotal moments rather than having them up all the time. I think at some point they changed Val's skills to have the soul gain prevention. Do you think a change like that for Flasks would work, where you have like a Flask charge gain prevention duration?
I think they could get away with the Vol skill one because while there were pretty dedicated Vol builds and stuff back in those days, it still wasn't like you didn't throw a Vol skill. Well, maybe you threw a Vol skill on like every build if you had Vol haste or Vol grace, but it wasn't a linchpin in the way that Flasks are. you know?
Mhm.
Like, flasks are a huge deal in literally every build. I've played one build before that didn't have access to its flasks because it was like Umbilicus Immortalis weird build, and so the flasks were given to the minions, and that felt awful. It felt terrible. It's just there's so much that gets stripped away from your character if you can't use them. Even just simple things like you don't have a granite flask and you don't have a phasing flask. Well, I don't have another way to get phasing on this build, so now I'm dealing with running into every mob, and also my phys mid is garbage against trash monsters. Like, it's so much more foundational. It's crept into so many more aspects of every single character. I don't think they'd be able to do that. It would have to be something that, I don't know, is a little more of a gradual change.
I mean, flasks is very much a Marvel Hero situation because you need to keep in mind it's a case of if you remove 100% of uptime on Quicksilver flasks across the entire player base, everyone's build just suddenly feels substantially worse to play. Like, because that's straight up, like, just not even if you've run like a crazy like increased effect or anything, but like if you're just like, oh, everyone just lost 50% movement speed. Not even like attack speed for like shield charge runners, but just everyone loses 50% attack speed. And then you're like, haha, leap slam, attack speed, headhunter gamer. And then you get that massive gulf between player speeds, and it's this whole thing. But yeah, Flask used to feel really good back in beta and stuff. But there's also the whole thing of, you know, back then we pressed like 2 buttons because you couldn't use movement skills. If you use movement skills, you'd desync. So you would use like your normal skill and then you would cull, unless you were a cursor, in which case you pressed all the buttons. Because if you were like a pentacurse build, you had to do each curse individually. But yeah, I mean, back then, I remember playing the standard like freeze pulse crypt marauder build. You would walk up to a pack, manually do 3 different curses, and then start casting freeze pulse. And you'd have to cast like 10 freeze pulses to kill the pack. Like it was a very
old bogey.
It was a very different game. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I remember cursing manually beforehand.
I don't think there's a proper solution really to flasks except overhaul the entire system. Like, I'm not even sure that they should exist. It could be a case of, like, essentially they're charms right now. That's what they are. They're charms. They're on
you have to press a button.
Yeah, they're charms that hurt my hand. That's what they are. Maybe they shouldn't be there. Yeah, maybe they just shouldn't be there if that's the case. Or maybe they should actually be charms if that's the case. Or maybe there should be 2 flask slots and you've got one for your resource and one for your life, and maybe you get to roll those and that's all you get, and then the other power gets put in other places.
Like, just buff the micro distillery belt a ton, so everybody gets to drop 1 flask, and they can use the 4 flask belt.
And you can use the timeless jewel as well, which does the fast stuff. I really wish that was strong. I would quite enjoy playing a build which only had like a Quicksilver and no other flasks. I'd be like, oh, that'd feel nice. I don't know.
I agree.
Harvest.
So yeah, routing back to the harvest thing. So not only do we not know whether there's changes to loot coming or not that will make the game feel more rewarding and less of a interaction with menus kind of gameplay, but rather that the strongest items come from killing the strongest monsters again. But also we don't know what kind of context of crafting we'll have in upcoming patches. We could very well have a similar system to Harvest where Harvest was too central, but it's kind of cool how it interconnects everything. Maybe we'll get another system that in tandem with Harvest will be used, where you can bounce back and forth, and that feels a little bit less problematic. Or I don't know, maybe new currency. I mean, no one would have thought that we get the Maven Orb the way that we got it, because I think for a long time people were always asking for an item to raise tiers of mods on items, and yeah, that was generally always regarded as something that's too strong to exist in the game. You were able to like knock up the tier of an item mod.
Yeah, once. I think if that existed just as that, like it pushes the tier up by 1 and that's it, then it would probably be too strong. But the fact that it's also in a null at the same time, so you have some degree of gambling going on, you're risking your item. Yeah, I think that the Maven Orb is actually a super clever implementation. I really like that. But jumping off your point about the strongest items coming from killing the strongest monsters, I think that there is a sort of a core, I guess dissonance is the word I can use here, like a core dissonance there between that goal and also crafting existing in the game and being any sort of deterministic. Like those two things cannot exist at the same time. You cannot have the strongest items drop from the monsters while also having determinism, even to the level of nerfed harvest. I think like they just don't exist in the same space unless you have some sort of, like the only thing that sort of circumvents that is when you have items that are either drop only, so something like talismans, but way stronger potentially if you wanted to make that happen. So they always drop corrupted and you're just hoping to drop a badass one, or something that is inherent to the item. And so you basically get this really cool crafting base, like synthesis items, like it doesn't matter what the fucking mods are on it. You're really excited when you see an explodey synth weapon drop every time. It doesn't matter what the affixes are. Like those are the only things that circumvent that system. Having something that is an inherent property or an unchangeable property of the item as it drops, so that crafting can't be used to obtain that. Like you kind of have to separate the two, If crafting can be used to deterministically obtain the thing, it's no longer going to be exciting to have the thing drop, because the more efficient way of obtaining it will be deterministically crafting it. And if crafting can't be used to deterministically gain it, then you can have the exciting thing drop, but it's a lot more frustrating to get. Like there is, I cannot see a way to bridge that. I cannot see a way to bridge that.
I wanted to say exactly what you said just then on the back of you praising Maven Orbs, because I think Maven Orbs are a mistake.
Yeah.
Particularly because of that exact problem. Because if we go, like, even with if we go pre-influence items, the whole thing was is like the best way to get an item was either to craft it yourself, or you might just get really lucky and it could be the equivalent of getting like a mirror drop and you just ID that 5 tier 1 item. You're like, what? But like it's incredibly difficult to actually just like ID a good item now. Even if we had just like lucky loot, it's incredibly rare that you ID or like get given a good item through something like ritual. What happens is like, oh, this is a decent base that I can then like fix with something else. Like all we really care about nowadays is is it the right eye level? Is it the right base item? And then maybe like best case scenario, if you're someone who plays SSF or not very much, is maybe like, oh, I got a pretty decent item with like 3 tier 1s that I can fix with something else. But like with the way that you have like, you can't drop multi-influence items. So the fact that we can have these like multi-influence Maven things means it's impossible to actually drop the best items in the game. And I think that's a serious mistake in an ARPG.
And the tier 0 mods on the influenced items, the tier 0 influenced mods are only accessible via Maven Orb.
It's not just that, but it's the fact like you can't drop a Redeemer Hunter chest. Like you physically cannot get the best items.
Yeah, true.
You can't drop double influence items. So not only is there double influence items, there's also then Maven stuff on top of that. It just means
I never thought about it that way.
I think it's a very big issue.
Yeah. No, I had that thought when I practiced Maven in permanent softcore, and I didn't get Maven orbs to drop and just bleeding currency because of that, which wasn't a problem because it was permanent softcore. But I thought that outside of the random lucky Maven orb that you drop, the Maven fight doesn't really feel all that rewarding.
Like if Maven dropped Maven orbs and also dropped like tier 0 items or items
or double influence with potentially
like
tier 0.
Then it's like okay. And it's something they can easily add in, like double influence items drops from particular bossons or whatever. But like, it's I don't know. It's a big issue that like, we have the whole problem with the loot bloat. We have all these issues with the loot. But I think the biggest fundamental issue with the loot in Path of Exile is you can no longer drop the best items in the game, and we haven't been able to for a long time.
Literally never even considered it, just because I always have loot all the way off. But that actually might be the reason why I have loot all the way off. Because there's just straight up a 0% chance that anything drops I care about. It's not going to drop on the floor. That's not how that works. I get 86 influence bases of exact specific kinds. That's it. Everything else is off because it can't. It's not going to be there.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why, despite the crashes and deaths, and I don't know a way to say this that doesn't sound pretentious. So I'm just gonna accept that I might. But that's part of the reason why, despite the crashes and deaths and disconnects and stuff, I have been legitimately enjoying hardcore trade more than softcore trade when I have played softcore trade recently, is because back when I started playing, one of my favorite things in this game was picking up a full tab full of rares, IDing it all, and seeing if there's something cool in the pile. And you're absolutely right. In softcore trade, it's a pile of alteration shards is what I have picked up. But, you know, at least in the smaller economy of hardcore trade that has items leaving it fairly regularly, a ring that has 70 life and a chaos res roll with an open prefix, that's still worth like 30C. You know, the helmet that dropped with life and double res, I can craft some hybrid chaos res on that and sell it for 15C. And that's not a ton of currency, but it's still exciting. And I would like to have that experience still in softcore trade, but I just don't. So
I mean, that's why I play SSF. Was the exact reason why I play SSF.
I don't have the patience, I guess. There's builds with like really specific things that I want to do, and I could grind for them in Soul Self-Found. Some people do, and I admire them. But I don't know. I can't grind for a specific alt quality gem or grind for a specific replica unique or something. It's just, I can't do that.
And also on that point, another reason why it's so important, because even if you could drop these double influence tiers, like they would still be so rare you would never really even get a good one. But like having that possibility that's actually an amazing thing for this average player we keep talking about, because that's suddenly a massive potential pool of wealth, or just a potentially very strong item that it can be given someone who doesn't have the game knowledge to go through these a million crafting steps. Like the way that they keep adding these like cherry toppings of like, oh, you need the double craft, you need the this, you need the that, you need the that. There's no way to stumble upon those items anymore. And because of that, it's impossible as a new player, casual, average, or whatever, to accidentally get this really cool item, which if you look back to earlier PoE, it was very possible, not likely, but it's very possible that you've maybe only played for 20 hours, but you had an insane wand drop. Like you could have had the best cast wand just drop for you. In much the same way you'll see people like, hey, I just got a Mirror of Calendar drop after like 50 hours. Meanwhile, I've played since 2013 and I've never seen one. Like, you know, yeah, we need these amazing items to be able to drop. And I know that's something that Chris at least agrees with fundamentally, because he decided to make a Diablo 2 successor. Like it's core to a loot game. You know, Path of Exile is the only loot game I know which you don't play for the loot. You play for the crafting. Like you don't play for the drops, and that's a problem. You know?
You play for the fungible loot. You know, you play for the things that can essentially all be traded back and forth through each other easily. That sort of thing. Just to play devil's advocate, the one upside there is that if you do have some basic knowledge of what it is that you need to put a simple character together, getting, if you're in softcore trade, even like a week into the league, getting like a pair of boots with life res move speed, getting a chest piece with a basic 6-link, getting, some starter uniques, cheap as dirt. So, if you just want to get a character going and you just want to get rolling, because those are now not really the highest tier of things you're shooting for anymore, and there's these echelons of gear above it, they are, of course, worth quite a lot less. And so it's a lot easier to get a character rolling, just a basic build going. And there's some merit to that. The fact that if you just want to make a basic build and get farming currency, it's fairly easy to do that. But yeah, you basically, instead of pulling the lever on a slot machine and occasionally hitting the jackpot, you're now just, by running maps and all that, you're just kind of investing into high yield, long-term stocks or something. I don't know. I don't invest. I should. I probably should. I'm nearing my 30s, but I don't yet.
don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, that isn't even necessarily a good thing, because you then have the issue of a lot of players won't know to look for, the
basic
tier 1 life, strength, resist. Like, a lot of people won't know to that, and even if they do know to that, if they then don't either have the patience or the knowledge or whatever to then set up those long-term crafting goals, well, congratulations, they've just completed their character day 1 for Tensi, which isn't good. Like, oh, I've got these good enough items for a chaos each. It's like, great, well, you just completed your entire build. Have fun, and if you're someone who wants to like make a new character every other day, then I guess that's fine. But like, I don't know. It comes back to the lack of progression, and that was one thing that Harvest was very good for, is it gave people those progression paths.
Quickly on the note of, you said the double corrupted items, and I feel like they did a really good job making those available from the Val side areas. The drop in maps can roll, that you drop double corrupted items randomly from the boss, and also with the current league mechanic, you get double corrupted items. I've definitely seen CB corrupted jewels with life rolls and some other corrupt implicit, and I really enjoy those, like, because they're so random that you'll never get a good one, but then when you get a good one, it feels really good.
Yeah, it's a difficult game to balance. I don't envy them at all.
Okay.
But yeah, I do think that a lot of these issues kind of come back to like the core fundamentals, and hopefully that's stuff that PoE2 will solve. But the loot definitely is one of the biggest issues in a loot-driven game.
There's one other thing that Harvest in its current form solved that will be a problem again with its nerfed variant, which I don't think was the correct way to solve it anyway, so I'm fine with it, but it's still a concern. Super off-meta, not so powerful skills. Harvest let you play them in a fun and actually playable fashion.
I disagree.
Because it gave you enough power to make a shit skill work. And I think that should be addressed different ways. I don't think there should be shit skills. I would like it if when they buffed 50 skills, at least 30 of them became usable instead of like none. But Harvest did solve that problem for a lot of people.
I've seen a lot of people say that with Harvest changing, that the meta's going to become terrible because I will no longer be able to play my like meme builds or whatever. I completely disagree. I disagree with that on a very fundamental level, because again, there's a very big difference between someone with like your level of knowledge and making like a meme build through Harvest, and then whatever we're saying the average person is trying to make, I don't know, what's a terrible skill? Glacial Hammer, what like
Hey, Glacial Hammer took rank 1 in the Raider race, not the
it is actually pretty decent. Yeah, it's actually quite difficult to come up with bad skills. A lot of them will be like a poorly mechanical spell, really. Like, I don't know.
It's because we've forgotten they exist. If you went in game and like opened up,
it's not even a case of they've forgotten them exist. You've forgotten they exist. It's actually most skills are actually pretty good now. Like,
it depends on where your goals are. This is, I think, one of the fundamental things that is problematic in this discussion. Because, yeah, if someone's goal is to clear 100% Delirious T16, they want to kill Feared, they want to do, Witnessed Uber Elder, then a lot of the skills are going to seem very outdated and very unviable. But if your goal is to Alkin go on endgame maps, like T14 to 16 maps, that suddenly opens up a whole field of options, Like, you can Alkin go on T16 maps and probably even do, like, Cyrus 6 to 8 with, like, fucking Static Strike or Glacial Hammer, and it's not that bad. You can do it with those skills for sure. But I wouldn't want to try and take on 100% Delirious maps with that, no. Like, there's this huge swath of content in Path of Exile, and I think one of the core issues with things like Harvest, as well as a lot of other more meta balance decisions, is the question of whether or not everything should be able to do all the content. Like, should every skill be capable of doing Feared? Should every skill be capable of doing 100% Delirious T16? Where do you draw the line? I've asked that specific question a lot of times in like my stream and on YouTube and that sort of thing, and I get a huge variety of answers. There are some people who see it as just obvious that would be a balanced version of Path of Exile. Every skill should be able to do all of the content all the way up to Feared, but like That is not the current game at all.
I mean, it's also the fact that every single league, like because a lot of people just look at PoE Ninja numbers. Again, PoE Ninja numbers are incredibly disrepresentative of what people are actually playing, because you're only seeing this tiny fraction, especially towards the end of the league, where like you're only seeing like level 100s. But I mean, go back to Legion. That was pre-Harvest. Like, 60% of the player base is playing Cyclone. Like, every league will be like 60% of the player base is playing like one of 3 builds. You know, if you have Harvest or you don't have Harvest, it's the same stuff. I actually think that one thing, and some people might disagree with me on this, but I think there's merit to playing a build because you're like, I'm going to play this build because it doesn't require gear. And I kind of like that. It was like you used to play certain builds because, like, well, these can run reflect maps, or these builds can run no region maps. And I think there's actually something quite good about, like, oh, this is a build which doesn't require much, or it only requires a very certain amount to get rolling. It's a reason why I play so much of Caustic Carriers. Like, I play a lot of SSF, and it's a build that can do every single map mod and requires very little gear to get rolling. And it also happens to be one of my favorite skills. So, like, it has this really good lineup. When everyone can get access to the most powerful gear straight away, then I feel like you're more likely to only play the most broken abilities because they utilize the insane gear the most and they make the most out of these crazy setups. I think everyone having insane access to Harvest makes people far more likely to like Blade Blast whatever shenanigans than be like, I'm going to play a really hipster. Like, no, like, people don't play like that, because if you look at the numbers, they don't line up, you know? I don't know.
Yeah, I like that there's different types of skills and I don't know the answer exactly or where I stand on that question you posed, Octavian, with what would be a good way to balance things. But I do like the idea that some skills are good early, some skills are good late, based on either economy or what you can obtain in SSF. And some skills allow you to invest a lot and reach a higher top end, and some skills cap out early. And there is also a difference in quality of life, how you use the skills. So should the skill that provides more quality of life, more ease of gameplay, should that be as powerful as a skill that is complicated to play and that requires you to press 6 different buttons?
I mean, a guy in chat basically said what I was trying to say, but much more elegantly. I would argue Harvest hurts endgame build variety because it buffs builds to power level where the numerical powered skill no longer matters. The only thing that matters is the ease of use of the skill, which is why stuff like Blade, Vortex, Cyclone, etc. So I completely agree with that. When everything does enough damage, you then only play like, well, what hits the entire screen? Like,
you could have done an Incredibles reference, man.
But
when everyone is
exactly,
super, no one is.
No, but like, because there were some people in chat when I was talking about like what's the battle, people were saying like Sunder, like, oh, Sunder's terrible. Sunder does insane damage. Like, you can global bosses with Sunder. It's just Sunder compared to like Earthquake or Earthshatter is a bit clunky for map clear. And that's the other thing, like, where do we say is a bad skill or a good skill? Most skills which are bad skills still do like ridiculous numbers. It's just they don't have the smooth AoE or the smooth attack speed or whatever it is that makes something else feel, you know, a bit stronger.
Yeah. I mean, Blade Vortex is like numerically a super weak skill, but also one of my favorite ones just because it's mechanically so good and I can get the power. So, yep.
Yeah, that factor, but also what Octavian says, if everything's powerful, nothing is powerful, because if everything's powerful, then the new content that we get and the new balance level will accommodate that. And then when everything is, you know, the base power level of everything is so high, then the enemies are going to get buffed to the point where everything is only average again.
In answer to my own previous question, I don't think personally that every build should be capable of feared. You know, like I don't think personally that I don't view feared as core content. Core content in my mind is doing every T16 map and maps below it, and doing like Cyrus and doing all the Conquerors, maybe Shaper, Elder, maybe Uber Elder, that sort of thing. Like, I consider a build to be a completed, good, done build if it can do all of that. I don't try and push every build I have to the absolute pinnacle of doing 100% T16 or 18 or 19 maps, doing feared, that sort of stuff. Like that is the extra level, the extra step. But the issue comes in when people have varying definitions on that, and you consider everything in the game to be the core base content, and that any extra step is just also extra core content. I don't know. Maybe that's just my way of looking at things. I don't want to project that onto everyone else, but I feel like if your build can't do feared, that's fine. If your build can't do the highest tippy top of content, that's fine. It's not a bad build. It's still worth having played.
I mean, there's also something you need to keep in mind. There's a very big difference between can do it and can do it in hardcore. Because obviously your standard of, oh, this is a feared viable build, is a build that can routinely do the content safely.
Yeah.
Whereas it's a lot easier to be like, I will run this and maybe use 3 or 4 portals. And if you then add in that like caveat, suddenly a lot of builds become, viable for this endgame content.
You go from having this handful to this bucket full of builds if you can suddenly use a few portals. Yeah.
Like me, personally, I'm only ever going to play builds that will do it straight away because I spent the majority of my Path of Exile. I've been playing only softcore pretty much since Delve, but I've still spent the majority of my time playing Path of Exile with hardcore, so I always go for that kind of mindset of like, if I can drop 30% damage but make my build not die, I'll do that. That's one thing I always find really funny when I get like Patreon build reviews or whatever, is I'll get these like super softcore PB warrior things and like, Taki, fix this. And I'm like, well, that what I want to do is drop like all of your damage and make the build actually like tanky, but that's not what you want me to do. So
what you're doing is 22 million DPS with 2.5k life, but you could do 8 million and have
that's my biggest dude, if you're one-shotting the stuff anyway, you don't need like if it's dead, like if you only need 5 million to kill it, great, you've got 500 million PB, but it doesn't mean anything. Like, it doesn't make the build at that point. If you don't want to invest in life, just go into like a taxid or moonseed so it just maps faster. Like, if you want to do that, that's fine, but like, no, I need more damage targets.
The ceiling as to how high damage needs to be to handle the tip top of endgame now has actually been pushed up quite a bit further. Like, if you want to do absolutely everything, including feared now, I wouldn't recommend that, at least not safely, on anything less than like 8 to 10 million consistent DPS.
Lol.
Whereas,
I was doing all the endgame content like 1.6.
Oh, it's
course to carry.
It's probably doable, yes. But I'm talking like safely without portals.
Mine was safe. I mean, you saw. I remember. You saw my videos, and you're like, "Oh, that was."
I saw the Maven, which was very well played. I didn't see you do feared. I'm not saying I doubt you did it, but
I even saw fun with caustic.
I like 2 mil. 2 mil is my baseline of like, this is the minimum amount to comfortably do stuff.
Yeah, I was about to say my previous minimum would have been like 1.5 to 2.5 million, and that still is my minimum for what I consider core content. Which is why I don't know. I feel like I'm not expressing my point here well. Just like, I remember back in the day, back in Best Cherry League, I made this same point that the majority of my builds couldn't really even do Uber Elder, and I still considered them to be good, enjoyable builds. Like, I wish that mindset were a little more prevalent. That like, you don't have to reach the absolute top end of all content to have a build that was worth playing, and that would like, because that's people so often. Maybe it's just vocal. Maybe the majority of people aren't acting this way. It's probably the case the majority of people aren't acting this way. But I get a vocal minority at least commenting on videos or talking to my Twitch chat saying they feel like they wasted their time and their build was unpleasant and their build was a disappointment. And I ask them, well, what's the problem with it? And they're like, well, it's not killing feared fast enough or something like that. It's just, it's still fine. Like, you could do T16 maps quickly, do those, make some currency, invest more, make a new build. Like, you don't have to be right at the, don't you want the content to last? You don't have to be right at the end right now.
A lot of it is just, you get people obsessed, and PoE is very bad for that because of the way the game works, and like with Reddit and everything, especially, is like you just see these clips of like how he killed it in 2 seconds. It's like, the question you ask yourself: did you have fun the last like 3 weeks you spent playing Path of Exile? If the answer to that is yes, then you did it correct. Like, there's no wrong thing to that. The amount of times, like, if you stream or make content, it's like, hey, I'm playing this build, it's really fun, I enjoy it. Why are you playing this build? It's shit. You should be playing that. It's like, well, no, because I'm enjoying it. There's one guy, I won't call him out, but he's one of my regulars, and they're terrible. Like, they're really bad for sending me like build reviews or something, and they'll be enjoying it, and then I'll make a similar-ish character, but I'll like root differently. And then they'll be like, "Oh, I wish I hadn't wasted all my time playing this because you've done it this way now. So now my previous characters delete it." It's like, no, like you don't need to delete everything because someone else did something slightly different or slightly better, or like if you
That's
had
the
fun
great thing
playing.
about PoE is that everything has like everyone does. No two builds are the same.
So back in the every min-max build was tornado shot days. Back, before bows were taken out behind the shed and given 2 shots from a shotgun. I think it was Best Cherry League. Yeah, it was Best Cherry League. I was playing a Spectral Shield Throw Deadeye, and I think I just had like Deadeye in my stream title or something. I had someone come into my channel and get really, really vocal, telling me I was doing it wrong and that Deadeye was completely wrong and I should be playing, I think it was either Raider or Pathfinder. It was one of the other two. And, like Tornado Shot. And eventually he said, well, Tornado Shot is just awful in this ascendancy. And I'm like, I'm playing Spectral Shield Throw, right? He hadn't even looked at the gameplay on screen. He had an opinion on what he thought was the best way to do the thing. He saw I was playing a Deadeye and just assumed that I had the opposing opinion and got in there to argue with me. I wasn't even playing the build he was mad about. And that has lodged in my brain forever as being...
He just saw your damage and thought, oh, it must be Tornado Shot.
That has been lodged in my brain forever as being the pinnacle of like what I don't understand about people approaching builds in this game. But fun anecdote and all that. That is a fairly vocal minority. I don't want to try and paint the entire PoE community as that. A lot of people do take the game a lot slower and just play it for fun and stuff. But God, is it frustrating when you come across someone who's cantankerous about a certain way of playing a build.
Yeah. Briefly off the back of that reminds me, because I went through, before I was known only as playing Corsica Traps, I used to only play crit bow builds, and I used to only play crit bow for like a few years. And I would do like, and this also back when I was playing hardcore, so I'd play like Tornado Shot until I died, then I'd make Lightning Arrow until I died, then I would do like Ice Shot, and I would just like rotate between them. People would get really angry when I wasn't playing Tornado Shot. They're like, what's wrong with you? And it's like, well, I just played that, and I'm basically playing the exact same tree, the exact same everything. I'm just doing it slightly differently. And the thing which I find so funny about it is the actual play style is exactly the same. Like nothing changes. It's just the color of the arrows, and maybe like instead of globaling 8 screens, you only global 4 screens. But yeah, it's like, why are you using Lightning Arrow? And you could be using Ice Shot. It's like, well, if you're one-shotting everything, it doesn't really matter. It's just one's a different color. So like the gameplay's identical. So I don't know.
What other topics did we were just going to veer into more and more anecdotes?
Well, I mean, to be fair, the topic list was like talk about build shit, and we're talking about build shit, aren't we? So
yeah, nailed it.
Cherry picking the stuff from 3.13 and just so that we're not busy with Harvest the entire podcast episode. I thought like it would be nice to have some positives as well. But I feel like that links back to Harvest to a point that we didn't make, and that's actually I don't know how to pronounce the word, homogeneity of items. Homogeny, okay. Yeah, homogeneous would be the adjective. I was looking for the noun. But basically, I celebrate individual builds, right? Like the fact that Path of Exile has so many ways to do it. There's not one clear way how to do something right. And I feel like Harvest took a little bit away from that in its current iteration because it made the top tier items all look the same.
Yeah,
very
similar.
I agree with
that. That was actually something that I spoke about on Bay Class, and I could understand people's reactions to that. As someone who does play a lot of the same kinds of builds over and over and over again, I said there was the thing of, with Harvest, I will always have the exact same items every single league. And people are like, we'll just play different builds then. And I'm like, okay, that is sort of a solution. However, you're then saying you're having fun playing the game the way you want to play it, but you're having fun wrong because you're not engaging with Harvest the way that I engage with Harvest, because I never play the same build. So that whole thing is a bit messy. But yeah, no, I don't like the fact that Harvest did make it's the same as when we had the unlimited multi-mod, and every single item was just the same two alt regaled mods, and then everything else was just metacraft. Like, it's just boring when every item is identical.
I feel like the sentence "you're having fun wrong" just perfectly explains like just every chat I've ever been in. So you're having fun wrong.
I actually remember Noogie got really upset with me. This was during Harvest League because he made a really good belt, and he hosted me, and then he like whispered me the belt, and I'm like, all right. And he got his chat like, why are you like pretending it's not a cool belt? I'm like, well, no, it is. It's a really good belt, but he just made it with Harvest, so it's not special anymore because it's just like. You like it's if it was pre-harvest you sitting that belt, I would have like lost my like, oh, I can't believe you made that, like what the hell. But now it's like, oh well, yeah, you made that using the system that you make anything.
See, that's where elevated mods come in.
Yeah. Like it takes a long
but
time.
Unironically a little bit.
Okay. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Like I'm not trying to minimize the amount of work and effort that goes into crafting these insane items, but like when you do have that level of determinism, it does make items less inherently interesting because you're just like, oh, you did the thing.
The amount of lack of interest I have in gear people link me nowadays is, if people are real excited about it, they're like, I finally made my 6 tier 1 pair of boots that have like 5 influence mods on them. And I'm like, great, good job. I've seen 12 of them this league. What do you want from me? Like, you just printed the item in Harvest, like everyone else prints the item in Harvest.
I don't know. It's exciting to them. It's neat in its own right to some degree. I will mourn some of the lost weird stuff you can do with Harvest, but like I said earlier, Harvest isn't going away entirely, and I do actually kind of anticipate it still being a fairly powerful set of tools to work with going forwards. I am very glad that the Harvest nerfs haven't, for the most part, outside of I guess making like warlord weapons, they haven't really influenced how difficult it is to make a Fizz DPS weapon, because I think that's one of the things that Harvest actually improved the most. Is it made PDPS weapons way more accessible, and that's made melee way more enjoyable to me. So on a positive note with Harvest, since we haven't had a lot of those, I'm glad that making a PDPS two-hander or something is still going to be much easier than it was before, because those are on the whole uninfluenced. You know, sometimes you'll go for a bleed one and you'll have an elder mod on there, and those are going to be a lot harder to make. And sometimes you'll go for a warlord one if you want the biggest dick DPS to get the % fizz suffix, I think it is. It's like a hybrid suffix, but you know, you can still make much easier than pre-harvest. You can make like an 800 PDPS weapon, and that papers over a lot of the problems that melee has.
That was actually something I was going to say earlier. We started talking about like every other topic in the universe. Yeah, there's actually a lot of items, and this is something when you then talk about whatever a casual, whatever an average player is, you can still make just really good caster weapons. You can still make just really good, you know, a bunch of tier 1 life, res, whatever, chest piece, boots, gloves, helmets, whatever. And then it might be a case of, you make like a pretty good base item, and then you just YOLO an influence onto it, and maybe you get a cool mod.
Yeah.
Being able to fracture things is still incredibly powerful. I've used that on, like, I think I've had characters I've actually invested a decent amount in this league. I've had like 4, and I think each one of those has like 2, 3, 4 pieces of gear with a fractured roll on it, because it's just so incredibly strong for deterministically making something decent, and that'll still be around. Fracturing like Fortify effect on an amulet, or fracturing high fizz on a weapon to try and craft a good PDPS weapon, that sort of thing.
I love fracturing. I made like a really good fizz bow and fizz wand earlier just because of fracturing. I was fracturing temple affixes, just buying all the bases and fracturing temple affixes, and then essence spamming until you hit flaring.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
And then harvesting the rest.
Like zeal essences, you mean? Like deafening zeal for T0 attack speed?
Forget what I was. I forget what I was. It might have been fossil crafting.
Oh yeah, I mean jaggeds would be good too.
Yeah, I think it was just jaggeds until it hit flaring, and then harvesting everything from there, and you could like reliably make incredibly good biz weapons that way.
I really like essences. I think essences are neat.
They've stood the test of time. They are massively helped by the Haywork Hamlet nodes.
Yes.
I think those are some of the most successful nodes on the passive tree. Like they feel impactful and strong, and they're worth picking up, in my opinion, at least. You know, I don't know about softcore trade, but in either solo self-found or hardcore trade environment, they definitely feel worth, and they're not so disgustingly powerful that like I feel bad not farming them.
I think essences have always been an amazing mechanic. It's just they were so painful to trade. Like the things, whenever I'm like, should I maybe play trade again? I'm like, no, because I have memories of trying to buy fear essences back when I was playing summoner builds, and it's like, no, I don't ever want to experience that again. Yeah, screw that.
I'd love to see buffs to a bunch of the other nodes on the Atlas tree. I think that was on the topic list. I don't know if you want to get into that yet, Catmaster.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, I thought that was a great segue. I mean, we're approaching the last segment of the podcast, and I think that would be a fun thing to talk about. Highlight a little bit of the passive tree things that we think are in a good place, that we think are a little bit too strong or too weak. And I definitely agree with the Essence one, although I've not extensively used that one. That one looked great, and when I skilled it, I did notice something. But what I really liked was the Alva one in Glanak, where you have a 50% chance to double upgrade the room, and then if you if you change the room, you add the upgrade tiers from the existing room to the new room, guaranteed. And
did you
make such juicy temples?
Did you pick up the one that replaced all the non-magic mobs with magic mobs as well?
Absolutely, yes.
That one is so good. That single-handedly made Reliquary Scarabs exciting for me again. Because if you roll a super high rarity map and throw a Gilded or Winged Reliquary Scarab in there, and like Beyond or something like that, you just crap out uniques for every single Alva. And yeah, they're usually terrible, but like sometimes you'll get a really cool one. And like that's the fun feeling of gambling for drops that I really like in this game. And I mean, it was mostly just like Araku Tikis and Meganords Vises, but maybe something good.
One day a Headhunter and a Nemesis map. But, what did I want to say? That is definitely great, but for me, as someone who plays bad builds in SSF and tries to do high content when he doesn't have the damage or survivability for it, it really massively helps with the time limit and incursions. When all the monsters are magic, they add more to the time limit, so it gives me a higher chance of actually upgrading or changing the room, and also full clearing the incursion for maximum drops and experience.
Yeah.
So I really like that.
I want to play a replica Headhunter build and farm that node.
I think Replica Headhunter is neat. Yeah. That was the question I wanted to ask you. How disappointed would you be if they didn't really do much to the Atlas passive next league? Like maybe they just nerfed, like, I don't know, Valdo's Rest, and that was it.
Pretty disappointed. I feel like there's a lot of nodes that could use some buffs, and I don't think it would be like you don't even have to go that far out of your way to buff them. You can do some relatively simple things, like for the Rogue Exile one. There was back in Legacy League, there was a Legacy Stone, whatever they were called, that you could get that would put warbands in your map and make them have a more multi to rarity. You can just do that with the Rogue Exile node. Like that's already in the game to some degree somewhere. Like you don't have to do something fancy, just something different so it's worth testing again. Like I don't expect every node on the tree to be worth running. That's just maybe that's too pessimistic of me, but that's just not going to happen. But change it up so that I can explore again. That's the fun part for me, figuring out what strategies are worth doing over others.
So to elaborate that, so not just buffs and nerfs, but like how much of it, because some people have been saying like they want the passives like swap places and this, that, and the other. Like would you be do you want them to do that level of stuff, like how they move maps around on the Atlas, or do you want them to kind of be like maybe Valde Rest is always where the Harvey node is, or like that was more kind of what I was talking about? Sorry.
Well, I mean, if they're moving around maps anyway, does it really matter whether they're moving the passes between the regions? If they're
Yes, because you then always, like, I understand what you mean, but yes, if it's a case of this is always the incursion plus delirium one, this is always the
okay, if the combinations
like,
change.
You move around the branches, and that way you then have different, like, setups.
Could you imagine being the person trying to write the Atlas guide? If they're going to shift all the passives every single league forever?
I've never
already got a
seen
headache.
more sadness in my life than talking to Engineering Eternity about updating guides in XRCon. That was really great guy. I actually spent quite a lot of time hanging out with him. Octave and me had a day or two of just hanging out with him randomly in New Zealand. But we at one point we just talk about like updating YouTube videos or whatever, and you could just see the anguish in his eyes because his videos were so good and like he done. It's just like, oh god, yeah.
But that aside, yeah, I'd like to see the move mechanics around and have different pairings. I'm sorry, Ballard, but I would.
No,
I like variety.
well.
I want to theory craft new strats and stuff.
I
Especially
hate
when,
myself,
like-
I definitely want to see it.
Yeah, especially when like different kinds of nodes come together and you can be farming multiple things at the same time. I don't know. That's fun. Like I rolled for T1 Geomancy on all of my Watchstones in Valdo's Rest, which is the suffix that makes items have a chance to drop with maximum sockets. On top of getting all of the Harvey nodes and all of the Metamorph nodes, and just basically squeezing tons of monsters into the map for free and speedrunning them as quickly as I could. And that was a neat strategy because it leveraged multiple different aspects of the end game and used them all together to farm something. So if you can move around nodes on the tree and make new things like that pop up, that'd be neat.
How do you take out all the 6 sockets out of the map then?
Dude, so use like 4 portals.
Yeah, okay, that most people wouldn't be willing to do that.
Fusings are worth a lot more in hardcore.
Yeah, that's
It's like day 4 or 5. I turn off 6 socket items. Never pick them up again.
Bala, you don't pick up fucking every time I watch this podcast. It's like, okay, let's see how long it takes for Bala to be like, I only pick up 1 item a year.
You still pick up Exalt, you scum.
Sod it. I'm going to start calling people out. The most painful experience I've had watching any Path of Exile podcast was the episode you did early this league with Gazi and Path of Math talk about crafting helmets. I wanted to kill myself. Like it's especially since people spend such a long time saying Bay class is a bunch of elitists. And it's just these dudes just like wanking each other off. Like, my 200 exalted helmet. This is how I craft it. It's like, shut up. Like, please, just stop talking.
That episode was specifically designed to invite the top tier.
No, it was awful.
Top tier softcore crafting elite.
It's like just 2 Olympic swimmers just comparing their lap times. It's like going to okay, this is like a beginner's. Let's teach you how to swim, and there's just these 2 fucking Olympians just like flexing on these kids. Like, God, you can't hold your breath for very long.
You still use pool paddles?
Oh, look at this prick with his armbands on. It's like, Jesus Christ. It was, yeah.
But we're welcoming of any PoE players here.
Yeah. Well, very welcome here.
Yeah, no, it's just, I swear, it's just Tarky having the Gordon Ramsay vibes here.
Sorry, I'm using my phone as my webcam, and I'm back.
What were we talking about? Oh yeah, which nodes are going to be like nerfed and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, performance problems alone, Harbinger nodes are getting tuned. Like,
I wish
I'm
they
sorry,
weren't problematic though, because I really like them.
Sorry to anybody in chat who's like super attached to them, but they crash computers, man. Like, you can't. They're not gonna stay.
Oh God. Sorry, I had to get that out. It's been bothering me.
No, that was great. That's going to get that's the part of the podcast that's going to get the most amount of comments on YouTube, is that rant.
Good.
That's the part of the podcast that goes into the highlight.
Right?
Yeah, now we need a breather.
I'm going back to look at the topic list now. So I've lost my place.
I mean, we can also extend that conversation to really to ascendancy points and to the entire game. Is there anything that you think blatantly needs to be addressed in terms of power level that should either be brought up to be more equal or brought down?
Buff the Rogue Exile nodes. Buff the friggin' buff the heist nodes. I don't think there's been a lot of complaining about it because a lot of people just don't care about heist or don't want a heist, so they don't mind. But my God, I played with those nodes assigned for like 2 weeks and they're terrible. I never got a single revealed blueprint. I ran a lot of maps over in Lyra Arthane trying to get, going like, ooh, I'm going to save some rogue markers. And like I was doing that the whole time I was mapping. It was really annoying to my stream. And not a single one dropped. Like I assigned the nodes and nothing happened. Please buff them.
I never got Great Migration to proc, and that was like the first thing I filled in. And for the for the first 3 weeks, however long it was that I was like playing, it never once proc to me, which felt
I
really
had
bad.
it once in a Moon Temple. That's the one that replaces every rare monster with a beast. Yeah, I had that. Right, yep. 36 beasts in my Moon Temple. That was fun.
Really neat strat is with the Lyra Arthane beast nodes, you can roll, I think it's titanium watchstones for the naturally lucky prefix, which makes it so when a red beast spawns, you get the rarer of 2, which is technically different language than what the Lyra Arthane nodes give, because they just say that rarer beasts are more likely to spawn. So those stack and you get super rare beasts all the damn time.
Cool. That's cool.
It's really, really cool. So yeah, that's a good node. I would like to keep that as is, I guess, because for reference, in my entire time spent playing Path of Exile, I found 1 for rule boss beast up until this league where I found 7.
Yeah.
So it is a massive improvement.
I think my one issue with the whole Atlas system, I touched on it a little bit earlier, which was part of the reason I had issues with Harvest, is when we have a lot of out of Atlas activities like Heist and Delve, the fact that content doesn't interact with the Atlas at all makes it very bad to run that, or makes it me feel bad running that content. Like, even if I set up my entire Atlas to interact with Heist or to interact with Delve, when I'm then actually doing that content, it's like, oh, this is wrong. I feel like there should be some way that there is some interaction. So like, oh, maybe you've spec'd into the heist node so you get more blueprints drop, but then also maybe blueprints cost less to unveil. Or I don't know, I feel like it could maybe be less of a Atlas thing and more of a character thing. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I thought also that's why I was so happy, or why I'm so hyped to see changes, because I just think the system has a lot of potential. Like, it's really great in its current implementation. But there's just so many things that they can do with it that modify how single parts of the game work, that I'm just hyped to see, I don't know, make the Elrond slams in Betrayal specific, for example, like make them, because they're meaningless in this point, and just make them augment a fire mod, for example.
Yeah, that would be neat.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
Go ahead, Bally.
Is the answer more passive trees?
Like, I want to see it expanded, yeah.
Passive tree.
Yeah. I mean, if you could loop it all into the same system, I don't know if they can do that like from a technical standpoint right now. But, what if there was another Maven invitation for, you'd have to make the Delve bosses more common. But, a Maven invitation for all 4 of the Delve bosses. Call it, or
the heist bosses.
3. Heist bosses make me sad. I like heist, and heist bosses make me sad. Anyways, but yeah, you could like the Delve one, you could call it the Deep, the invitation for that, and then you could do one for, I guess, heist. I don't know, like expanding the system to encompass more holistically the entire game would be great, and I'm sure there's room for passive points influencing that sort of thing. Like this is something that I was talking about in my stream for a little while, and one of the ideas that we came up with was you are, for the purposes of reward spawns, you are treated as though you are 100 floors deeper for Delve or something like that, or boxes that drop rare items, roll them lucky, that sort of thing. That might be a little broken.
Yeah,
Delve cities have 100% more chance to spawn a boss. There's a lot of room to work there.
I think there wouldn't, like, even if they just kept it on the Atlas, I think it would be fine, just from like a pure balance point of view, that you had a node which just was, because like there's loads of nodes which interact with Syndicate, but then if one of them didn't change the Atlas Syndicate, but just how, like, you know, safe houses drop more loot, or like Katarina will drop more items. Like I would take stuff like that. I don't know. Likewise, if one of the Delve ones was like, you count as being deeper in the floors or whatever, or Einhar beasts like crafts are more likely to give better results. Like you're like to get like rarer uniques or whatever, or like double currency or double, like, I know, I feel like they could have it interact with some of the non-mapping content.
Veiled items drop with an additional veiled mod.
Yeah, exactly.
Double the speed you unveil things. That would be really nice early on in a league, actually.
That would be really, really nice. I like the way I did my Atlas actually was I spec'd hard into Jun early so I could get all my unlocks as SSF, which was nice.
Yeah, that's what I do with Cassia as well, so I can get my early oils and then spec out of it later when I don't care about the...
I think I would like the regrets to be more common. I feel like you should get some naturally for free. I feel like you should...
Ops of making, you mean?
I swear that there was a post from community team before this league launch, before Echoes of the Atlas, where they said that during the course of the Maven questline, you're going to get a few respec points, like just, you know, thrown on your tree, not even as orbs. Maybe I imagined that. Maybe they meant that you're just going to drop a few on average. Maybe that's what they meant.
Yeah, maybe that's what they meant. I remember reading that before we discussed this on Bake Festival. But yeah, it is a bit of a wasted opportunity, especially since the wording on some things is pretty vague, like what's a flesh architect, whatever the hell it is. So it's like you go to try something and you're like, oh, that isn't very good, or I want to try something else now, and it's like, oh, I haven't got any regrets. You know. Or at least have a recipe that you vendor like a full stack of regrets to get a Maven regret back or whatever. I don't know. Yeah.
Vendor a Maven plunder and get an Orb of Unmaking.
Yeah, especially now that, like, in the first league where that expansion is, they could have been a little bit more generous with the
yeah, you'd think they'd want players to really like test everything, because it's also when the regrets when there's less access to them, they're more likely to get vacuumed up by like power traders, and it means that people are less likely to change up their strategies. And if that stuff's really accessible, and normal people, whatever that means, or SSF players, like they're more likely to have fun, you know. I don't know. Yeah. Give me regrets, dude. Especially since I don't know if it would necessarily even be a bad thing. I don't know if there should even be a cost tied to it, because I understand the point of we want players like characters to have weight. So we'll have the whole regrets because we want there to be something of character balance. When it's like an account bound system that you can't easily have like different pages of or whatever, I don't know. It's
Yeah, I remember Octavian tweeting something along the lines of, I don't want the juiced up Harbinger in my lower maps when I'm leveling a new character in hardcore.
Yeah, I mean, just being able to disable the entire tree, not respec things for free, but just click a box and that the tree in that region is disabled would be nice. It depends. Like, again, that is much more of a hardcore issue than anything else. And also I can just run maps in another area of the tree, I guess.
For a while, I've kind of wanted to be able to have 2 or 3 different versions of my Atlas, even if it meant I had to unlock them separately.
I think the main reason that GGG wouldn't pull the trigger on that is it's probably, I don't know, the Atlas is confusing enough, and having a bunch of different ones that you feel like you need to keep track of and set up optimally and all that. I don't know. I can see that as being a justification for not bothering. Though, to be fair, Hearthstone used that same logic and it didn't really hold much water there. If you're not familiar,
Kind
they
of
used
more
to
than 9
have
deck slots.
Yeah, they used to have a limit
Confusing.
on like 6 or 3 or however many. I don't know. I didn't play the game much, and they said they didn't want players to have too many deck slots because it would be overwhelming.
It was it was enough that you could have one deck for each class. So that was their viewpoint of like, why would you ever have more than one mage deck, Forehead? Like, just stupid. Yeah.
But the thing is like they could implement it in a way like, oh, you've killed Maven, you've unlocked some of the Atlas. So they wouldn't do that because it's GGG. It'd be like, welcome, you've completed a tier 1 map. Here's 15 Atlas pages. Like, have at it, new player. You know, like,
No, but just next to the button where you can switch them on and off for display, the trees have like 3 buttons where you can switch 3 different states of the little tree in the region. For example.
No, they need to make it like the old Citadel, so you couldn't tell what region it was in. So there would just be 3 moving buttons that would just rotate around your Atlas. And they would all look exactly. They'd all be slightly different shades of blue.
Oh yeah,
They made the Citadels better. The Citadels are real pretty now.
No, the Citadel's good. I like
love
also
them
what
visual.
they do. Oh, go on,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, I love them visually, but when a Citadel spawns with the Conqueror, you can't interact with the tree that you unlocked from Maven. So sometimes you're in that awkward spot where you just spawn the Conqueror and then you go and do your 3, 4, 5, 6 way, whatever. You unlock new points, but you can't spend them because you can't open the thing. It's occupied, but that's a nitpick.
One thing I was going to say quickly, I did really enjoy what they did with the missions on the Atlas. So it's like, yeah, we can't really see these. Do you mind just changing the visual a bit? Like, yeah, sure. Blinding light. Yeah, that was good. I do sometimes think there is a slight layer of resentment that runs through some changes that happen. It's like, oh, you want that? Fine, we'll give it to you. If that's really what you want.
Yeah.
We give it to you in a way that you realize.
Here you go. Here's the sun.
So specifically the Conqueror influence on the Atlas, they're brilliant now.
Yeah, they look great.
Yeah. All right.
Oh.
Do we have anything left? Did we nail this from like head to toe? Feels pretty good.
Could open another can of worms. There's always something, but then we probably go massively over time. Maybe Parky Cat wants to tell us a little bit about whether there's going to be a Bayclast before the next league announcement.
Tarky Cat would also like to know. We don't do as many Bayclasts as we normally do, but this is usually what happens when the Tarky Cat tries to organize Bayclast. Hi, other people who I do Bayclast with. Are we doing a Bayclast? Wait 5 days. Yes. No. Okay. Next week. Hey, can we do this weekend? Maybe one person will reply, yeah, I can do it. I can do it. No, I can't do it. Okay, what about next week? And it's just like, and then we'll have it all lined up. Then some prick will be like, race week. And it's like, oh, never mind. Like, yeah. Whenever we try and organize something and it seems like we'll maybe do it, someone's going to announce a bunch of races. And it's like, oh, never mind. So, we will hopefully have one maybe. And it looks like we might have another Bay class as part of like the announcement for 3.14. So if that happens, I'll be pretty neat. But that's still all to be worked out. But yeah, maybe.
Haven, you're still pushing a build in hardcore to 100 this league?
Me?
You're pushing your build still?
Not after level 99 death, surely.
No, I have another character at 99. I might take it to 100.
Shit.
I am going to be doing a private league, though, in a little less than a week. Brittley is hosting a bingo league, which is where she puts together a board of a bunch of different goals. You know, things like, I don't know. It's usually not like super crazy goals because it's a relatively short league, so it's not like do 100% delirious T19, but something like kill a pure version of at least 3 out of 5 breach lords, or do, you know, delve to depth 350 or something like that. You know, relatively end game but fairly achievable goals. And the first people who get bingos, which 5 in a row, get MTX rewards. You know, things like a $60 supporter pack or something like that. So I'll be participating in that. I have no idea what I'm going to play. I'm thinking maybe Cold Dot Slinger because I haven't played that yet, and it's a very good starter. But there's some time before that starts, so I might push to 100, or I might just stream some Minecraft because I've kind of gotten back into that a little bit.
That sounds all incredibly fun. I only participated in one bingo so far, I think. Or was it 2? No, it was only 1.
And this next one is happening this Friday, or Saturday. Sorry. Saturday is when it starts. And if you want to join, you can go to my channel or Brittle's channel and do !bingo for info.
Cool.
Sounds good. So, Valor, any upcoming projects still? That Atlas guide coming out before the Atlas changes?
God. I just started. I don't even know if I want to touch the Atlas stuff until we find out whether it's going to change every league or not, because that changes how much effort goes into it. If it's going to change every
league, it doesn't change until you publish it. That's the rule.
Yeah, which is why I don't want to do it right away. We'll find out if things change. Most of what I'm doing from now until league start is probably just nailing down league start builds better. I'm going to try and add a whole bunch of build guides to the website because I basically want to double the number and I have nothing else to do but focus on it. So I'm going to focus on that and try and double the number of good league start builds, as well as I'm spending a bunch of time trying to get my time down because my time to maps for someone who's played as much as me is garbage. At best, I'm like 8 hours to maps on League Start, which for like a full-time streamer, softcore trade person is bad.
I mean, if it makes you feel better, I used to really care about that stuff. And I think my best was like in a League Start environment was like 5 or something. But I always just do 8 to 10 hours now. I don't know. I just kind of, I just regressed for whatever reason.
I don't want to be like a racer or anything. Yeah. Like I don't have that sort of motivation, but I'd like to get down to under 5. Anything sub 5 would be fine.
It kind of feels good to be in maps fast, but I don't really like those 5 hours of extreme rushing, or 5 to 10 hours depending on you, or 3 to 10 if you're a top tier. But I kind of like to take it slower on League Start, and sometimes not with Ritual, but sometimes I engage with the league mechanic, because otherwise you skip the league mechanic until you're in maps, and then all of a sudden you do it, and then just something unexpected happens and it kills you. And it's nice to kind of ease yourself into that while you're still reasonably powerful versus the content, and or you're doing stuff that can easily kill you. But as for myself, I want to get to 90 in the gauntlet after some disheartening rips. I'm still looking to enter the prize pool for the level 90 raffle. And then afterwards, I want to probably make some YouTube videos where I talk about